Hello, product people. Welcome to the Product for Product podcast, hosted by Matt Green, data advocate and product manager, and Moshe product leader and author. Our goal is to serve the product community by helping you find products that can help make your work in product management easier. Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Product for Product podcast.
Welcome back. Product managers these days are coming from various backgrounds with various skills. And today, Moshe and I discuss, what technical skills that would really help a product manager in their roles. Hoping to dive into some areas, whether it be front end, back end, or database. And let's kick it off.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good, Moshe. How are you doing?
I'm good. So we both are coming from, some technical background, different areas of technical background. You from data and data analysis and etc. I think those that follow us already know that. That's one of your passions.
Yep.
And I'm coming from development background. So people are always asking us about what technical skills they might need, as product managers, because many product managers don't come with that background.
Right.
Now, you don't have to be to come from a technical background to be a good product manager or to be an excellent product manager. That's not the point. But the point is that sometimes it is helpful to have some abilities so you can be a bit more effective in your work.
Yeah, versatile.
Versatile, yes.
Yeah.
Or more dangerous in your work, whichever way you want to look at that.
Yep.
Right?
That's so true. Yep.
Yeah. Well, one of the things before we start with the tools that we wanted to talk about, one of the things that, is helpful to come from technical background is when you talk with the developers and they try to tell you, this is how it's going to take this and that long and whatever. Sometimes you could sense a bit of a BS, but not always.
Yeah,
but
right.
It could help. Nothing against engineers and their estimates or stuff like that, but it's just a matter of the fact is that some people, they will try to give you some not the most accurate answers on that.
Right. And it's based on their experience and what they think, how they see things, and you may be able to take the lid off that some, and let's get to a shared understanding of what we're trying to tackle here.
Yeah. On the other end, one of the hardest thing for me when I moved from engineering to product management was I stepped on a lot of engineers' toes. Because I came up with solutions, I told them how to do things, and they were like, man, this is not your job as a product manager.
Yeah, that's right.
So I learned it the hard way on my first product management job. But so you mentioned in the introduction that there are different areas of, the architecture, the front end, the back end, and the data layer. Usually those are, three major architectural levels. And so we actually, when we were planning for this episode, we were thinking about each one of those layers and then what type of tools or technical skill might be helpful for a product manager.
Yep.
So let's start maybe with all the way in the back in the data.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Start with the foundations.
Start with the foundations, exactly.
Yeah.
So with the data, we had a series, actually our first series of the podcast was about product analytics, right?
Analytics, yep.
Yeah, so we talked about systems that you can integrate with your product and then start collecting data and then approach those systems to give you data about how people are using your product. Mm-hmm. So we talked back then about Mixpanel and Amplitude and Heat and Pendo, I believe.
Yep.
And but many companies don't have those systems. Most companies probably will have Google Analytics.
Yep.
But even without those systems, there is still a lot of data that we collect, and this is just plainly in the product's database.
Yep.
So if the database has ways to collect, just in general transactions that happen, whatever the transactions are, right?
Right.
It doesn't have, I'm not talking just financial transaction, but any type of transaction that happens through the system.
Right.
Then usually the developers will build it in a way that will capture those transactions and will capture when they happened and who did them and stuff like that. They may not do it in order to know, for the analytics, they may do it just to make the system work, right? Because otherwise the functionality will not work. But with a few simple tools, we as product managers can also gain from accessing this data. So here we were thinking about the simplest thing for the product manager is to know SQL, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I pronounce it SQL, but some other people pronounce it a different way. But we're talking about SQL.
Yes.
Which is the language to query from relational databases.
Right. Anytime someone asks me like, what kind of language should I learn? I think SQL is like a great one to start with because it is used in so many companies and it's very, versatile and allows you to get the data. So it allows you to explore the database. So I think it's, you don't have to write complex queries and stuff. I mean, you can do some basic queries to get to the data. And I think it's really powerful and really universally used throughout businesses.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I learned SQL 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, the first time I learned it. And then I had to learn it a few more times after that because I learned it in different places. And it didn't change much since then.
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. Yeah. It's pretty solid.
Exactly. The nice thing about it is that all you have to do really, if you don't know it, there is a lot of documentation out there, about the language, what are the statements to use, but you really have to just ask one of your engineers to give you view access to the database. Right. So as a product manager, I always ask them for view only access. I never asked them for for write access,
right,
or delete access, because I didn't want to mess up with the database.
Absolutely.
So that was not the intention. The intention for me was not to change anything in the database or mess up. Even the developers should not really have that power in some cases. Depends what they're building. But I wanted to have view only, so I can only query and select from the database. So the select is a basic statement in SQL for selecting information from the database.
Yep.
And then you need to understand the structure of the database, which is probably maybe the most complex thing that you will have to do.
Yep.
Mainly because you will have to know where the data is, what tables they reside in, what is the relationship between the tables and stuff like that. I've been in situations that I got into a new company that I joined. I asked for that access because I didn't have any other analytics tools. In the beginning, people were like, no, just ask us and we'll query it for you. And I'm like, I know how to query. If I have access, I can save your time, right?
Yep.
So sometime the database was documented somewhere. Most of the time it wasn't.
Yep.
And sometime learning the database. I'm sure you can tell us more stories here, Matt, about that. About the structure of how the database was structured, or just naming conventions of tables and fields and stuff like that. I've seen some really bad situations, bad places where it was very hard to learn.
There's definitely cases where if there's intention involved, like, hey, we're going to build a database that's structured in a way for external reporting and to really fuel our analytics within our company. And there's going to be databases, like we were saying, it's to support a application, and it's basically a storage container. And you're not thinking about the tables and the normalization of things, and the fields and the tables can be complex and confusing. And so I've been in those situations. I've been in both situations. So in those cases where it was set up to be more of a storage for the application, I've had views created to where I know what I'm looking for. I go kind of explore and poke around, and then I work with developers to create a view and say, okay, I need this table over here. I need some fields over here. I need some fields over here, and let's create a view for it because I need them joined up. I need to kind of cut through the weeds.
Yeah.
Then I could use that for my reporting and analytics and stuff.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And even if you're even more advanced, you can also build like store procedures, and
Yep.
those are like functions that instead of every time you want to run this, a query, you have to write it. You can run it once, save it as a stored, what they call store procedure, and then execute it later. Usually, it is used by some developers for their development work.
Yeah.
But I've used it myself, in my product management years to just store my own stuff if I wanted to execute things again and again or whatever.
Right.
And the nice thing is also that some of the tools that you will use to execute your SQLs will be tools that come with the database. So they will have front end usually. So there is always tools for front end that give you nice tables as outputs. And usually, if you want, you can also export this into like Excel spreadsheet or other places where you can then assess the data even more.
Right.
So that's usually the stack I would use.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will go to the engineer, ask him for that view access, ask them like what is the tool that I need to use to run the queries, then use that tool to run the queries, export the data that I need into Excel, and continue from there.
I would wind up working in tools like Power BI and Tableau, where they're sitting on top of the database. And so with a tool like Power BI, you can bring in those tables and then you can work with those tables and make joins and do a whole bunch of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And then you could even embed your own SQL scripts and stuff in there as well. So
but usually you will need a license for those tools, right?
Yeah.
They're not free tools, Power BI and
Power BI is Power BI. You can have Power BI desktop, which is free.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Or you can go to a pro plan.
Mm-hmm.
Power BI is like the one I've used predominantly, and it's a great way if you don't want to go into the database, you can take the database to you or bring it to you. So,
I see. So you link the database to the Power BI, and then you do the queries from Power BI.
Yep. You can either absorb the data or you can do like direct queries, but like a direct query to the database, depending on the basically anytime you run something within Power BI, it requests data from the database, or you can ingest the actual data into Power BI. It makes it
like
faster.
As a local.
So it's a speed. Yeah, it's a local. Yeah, so it's a speed thing. So if it's a big query and a lot of work, you're probably going to want to ingest it into Power BI.
And maybe that could be another theme for future episodes to talk about some of those analytics tools that are usually used by BI, business intelligence, and data warehousing, and then querying and getting reports from the database. But just last question about that: is Power BI using SQL or it has its own way? Because I used it briefly at Power BI, but more as a consumer of reports that already existed. I didn't really build my own. So
it leverages SQL, but then you can use DAX. DAX is its own data analysis expression. So you can write DAX, which you can create new calculations and stuff within Power BI.
I see.
But it does SQL for the database work.
And what is simpler to learn, SQL or DAX?
SQL. DAX is isolated to Power BI, so
right.
So it's its own language. So unless you're going to stick with Power BI and that stack for a long time, I would definitely recommend learning the SQL first because like we're saying, it's tool agnostic. I mean, you can use SQL anywhere, whereas something like DAX, it's powerful, but it can be a bit complicated. And it's isolated to Power BI. So, but I was doing this stuff because my experience had me embedding Power BI within an application. And so I was embedding reports and stuff within an application a customer was using. So I was using data, bringing it up, building reports for them, and then putting it out there for them to consume.
right.
into the product. So definitely
Yeah.
more of a technical product manager role, but nonetheless, it was knowing these kind of things and being able to access it is key.
Right, right. Perfect. Okay, so let's switch now to the next layer of the architecture, the backend. And usually backends are developed, these days at least, with a lot of APIs.
Right.
So whether it is microservices or other architecture, many times you will have APIs in the mid layer. And one of the tools that one of the most common tools that people are using to test APIs is called Postman, which is a free tool out there. There might have some. I always use the free
I always
version.
use free. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've started using free, so
Yeah. They might have some
you can upgrade to some other stuff.
versions, but I'm not sure what is it for. But in general, what it allows you to do is to connect with your APIs or any other APIs out there that you might want to test and run them, basically.
Right.
So to run an API, you need to have some type of inputs and outputs, because API is an application programming interface. So it doesn't have any UI. It's only a backend. It's only talking to your logic of the application. It runs some logic, and then it's on its own will access already the data in the back layer of the database.
Client to a server.
Right. And so usually you will have some type of inputs, and most of the time they will be structured as some JSON file or JSON format. JSON is spelled JSON, so there's no A there.
Yeah.
And if you might be familiar with JSON, but if you're not familiar with JSON or Postman or APIs, then that's one of those skills that could be very helpful for product managers to learn. Even more than that, I've been in a situation where we developed a new product, and that product was mainly a platform. And before we even developed the front end, we only developed the back end. And the only way that I could actually access the logic of the platform was through those APIs. So, and that was when I also I knew what APIs were, but JSON was new to me, and this has been, I think, on my first product management job. So it's been a while. So JSON, I had to learn JSON, and then people told me, "Oh, just use Postman," and I'm like, "Okay, what is that Postman exactly? Do I have to go to the post and get?"
They drop off mail.
Yeah, drop us a mail or call the postman to come here. But it's a very convenient way for you to use APIs where you can basically construct your request. So there are different types of APIs. There are APIs where you get data. There are APIs so you select information or you want to get something. There is APIs where you do something. So you update or delete or whatever. There are APIs for collections. There are APIs for individual entities. But in general, API is an API. So the way to call them is quite common between them, and it's quite simple. You just need to know the structure, how to do that. And then with Postman, you can also save all of those requests, and you can rerun them as you go. And then you get the response from the API. So the response usually will be also in a format of JSON, but also some type of a success or error or something like that.
So I've worked with Postman, and I'm continuing to learn Postman at this time. And yeah, I think it's really important to at least have a general understanding of it in terms of how systems communicate and how they use these APIs to call for data and request data from other applications. Because in today's day and age, as we all know, like interconnectivity of applications is so like vital these days. Almost all applications are using these, like you're saying, and the ability for your application to speak with another one is vital, but you need to test that. And so that one of the cases I've worked on, a client needed they were using an application, and they had survey responses and stuff like this, and they wanted to bring it into our database because they ultimately wanted to report on it. They wanted to get insights into what these surveys were doing. So we had to use Postman to test the API and make sure what was coming back and what we were retrieving was accurate and what the client was going to need. And so as soon as we were able to identify that, we were able to ingest that into our database, which ultimately goes back to like what I was doing in like Power BI and stuff. So I couldn't have made that bridge without Postman and being able to test it and observe what was coming back in those calls. And so that's where my first like strong introduction to this was, and I think that was like really valuable. It ultimately helped the client see these responses, in the reporting that we were producing, and it was really helpful.
I can tell you also another thing that your story reminded me when we developed that platform I mentioned before. We had external users, and when we have internal users, the external users really were using other systems that were integrating with our platform. So they didn't have direct access to the APIs. But the internal users, they needed to do some setup, for some clients and stuff like that. So all of those admin things, the first releases that we gave them were APIs and told them use Postman. So, we didn't even develop a UI for our internal admins. So we saved time by that. Luckily, we were able to convince them to do that, and they were willing to learn how to use Postman and call those APIs. So they had some, technical leniency, and we didn't have an issue there.
Yep.
But the point of the story here is that when you build in iterations and you want to build the least amount of stuff to prove your product actually works and people will use it, that's one of the ways. You don't have to necessarily build UIs for internal usage. If you have people that don't mind using the APIs directly, you can give them that.
Right. There's even a discipline around API managers, product managers these days. So
absolutely, because API, like anything else, is really a product on its own. So in many places, it's just a layer of the product, and people usually don't have access to it and don't see it. But in many other places, API is the product. And we actually we interviewed Jason Knight in the past, and he was working previously in a company that's what they did. They build a platform API for others to use in their products.
Yeah. Because if you're thinking about your product and you want to be able to monetize, if you have some unique data set you're capturing, there's opportunities there to monetize it. And in order to like monetize it, you need to allow customers to come in and export it and get it out of there through automation.
Or even if not monetizing, but if one of the ways for you to grow your business is through, or your product is through embedding it or integrating it with other products, and you open up the platform to developers from outside to use your APIs, then and then they will use it in their product. Then the API is one of your products as well, because those developers are one of the personas that are using something you built.
Right. Yep.
Right. And one last thing about APIs is their documentation, because in order for you to be able to use API, you will need to know what are the parameters it needs to call, and what are the inputs and outputs and how to understand them. So you will need to put your hands on the API documentation. That's usually is an easy thing to do, because these days there are also tools that help the developers document their APIs quite a bit automatically. I believe Swagger is one of them.
Swagger is one of them. Postman does it too. Like Postman has they allow you to build APIs as well as test them, and they also help with documentation. So I'm discovering a lot of this as I go through. I'm working on their Postman Academy at this time, so I'm discovering a lot of this. So it is a pretty robust tool, and so
I think it's really developed a lot since the last time I used it. So
it's pretty slick. It's pretty slick. And by no means do you have to be an expert at this, but I think like it would really help product managers to understand how your application can talk to another one, another party, is something that would really benefit PMs.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So last but not least is the front end, And the front end, this is what most of us product managers are dealing with on a regular basis to see that people can actually use the product.
Yep.
But being technical there is also something that can be helpful. And I'm not talking about, the work that is done before we develop the software. Like, we talked in the past about wireframes and design and stuff like that. I'm talking about once you have the product developed, the one thing that could be useful is I'm talking specifically Chrome, but I believe other browsers has that as well, is the developer tools. And a bit more specific over there is understanding, HTML and CSS.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because you can play a bit with the front end using the developer tools and changing, understanding what are the components on the screen, where to find and inspect those components, and then what is the design of those components and what the CSS that control them, and therefore, how to change it. And now the CSS is the components that, or the language, if you may, it's not really language, it's more of a configuration, I guess, that controls how different elements on the screen are going to look and feel. So their colors and font sizes and the font and the positions and structure and a lot of different things, and images and things like that. And in the past, before CSS were created, and I'm old enough to remember that, everything was part of the HTML. So it was all kind of combined together, and it was very limited to, what you could do. These days, you have the HTML, which controls the elements themselves on the screen. And then the CSS is a separate file, usually, that controls how they look. But with those developer tools, you could navigate to them and change them on the fly, just locally on your browser. So it's not going to affect your clients, and it's not going to change the product for your clients. But at least you can see how things might look like if you plan to change them.
So that's what I've done in some prior work. I worked with a friend of mine, and we did for the lack of mock-ups we had, and we had to do something on the fly. We went in and updated the CSS and through Google Chrome developer tools. And so we were just trying to play around with it and see, like, okay, how would this look? Like, how would this is the product. We want to change some fields, reorganize a page, and we were able to do that on the fly and really kind of play around with it. I thought it was a really great exercise, and it kind of saved us time where we would have had to go and do mock-ups and stuff like that in another tool. And it just gave us a good understanding, like for me personally, just like how the page was organized and constructed was also a benefit.
Yeah. It also helps when you use tools like Pendo or Heap, where you have to, or User Pilot, where we talked about that as well for in-app messaging, where you have to find the elements that you want to assign the in-app messages to. So that's helpful as well. So it's not so much, you don't really have to deal with the CSS where you find your element, but then there are CSS or controls through those tools that control your in-app messaging, because you want your in-app messaging to look and feel part of your product, and not just the cookie cutter that comes out of those systems.
Right.
So that's another use case where you might want to play with that a bit. I learned actually when I last developed anything, it was before the days of it was the early days of CSS, and before the days that Chrome was what it is today. So I don't even think I had Chrome back then. I think I had Firefox only, and Explorer, Internet Explorer, for those who remember that. But so I actually learned how to use these developer tools and inspecting elements and changing them a bit by observing UI developers that did that for me. So they helped me with those things, and then they were like, oh, okay, I get it. So it's again, you want sometimes to do these things on your own just to explore things, and then you are much more educated and can be, like we started the show, could be a bit more dangerous or
Yep.
effective
Yep. Yep.
with your product.
And then when that kind of stuff comes up, you at least have a general understanding of like what people are talking about. Because as product managers, you're going to hear a bunch of different things because you're talking to a whole bunch of different people, and they're
Yep.
going to use phrases and terms that you might not understand unless you dabble in a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
And I think the general thing there is just to have a good understanding of what people are doing, how things are organized, how things are constructed. By no means do you have to like do it all yourself, but just to be able to communicate and understand and
Absolutely.
stay on the same page with
Absolutely.
everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, that was great. I enjoyed that chat, and it's funny because as simple as these tools are, some of them exist for many, many years,
Mm-hmm.
or their technology exists for many years. It's just about the current tools to apply them.
Yep.
And I hope this helps some of the product managers out there that are less technical and might look for areas where they can maybe tap into it if
Mm-hmm.
they're inclined to. We can also talk about some other areas. Maybe we'll do another episode for that. We'll see. But more things related to specific stacks that the product people are using, or the product is built. But the complexity there is like every product is built on different stacks, so it
Yeah.
becomes like an ocean or a galaxy of products.
Yeah. A bunch of different configurations, right?
Yeah, so it's hard to pinpoint to a specific one.
Yeah.
But if anyone of our listeners have suggestions for other things that they think every product manager should use, then by all means, please contact us. We're always happy to hear. We're also working on a series on user testing. If you are using one of the user testing and you want to platforms and you want to come to the show as a guest and tell us about it, we'll be more than happy to have you. Or for any other topics, we're always looking for new exciting guests to be on our show.
Yep.
Or returning guests. We
Yeah.
have this as well.
Yep. Always welcome back returning guests as well. So
We'll have all of our guests.
yes. Awesome. Thank you to all the listeners. Really appreciate it. And Moshe, thank you as always. And we'll talk to you next time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Matt. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you to all the listeners. We really appreciate the feedback and support. Please leave us a review to help others find the show on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else you're listening to the show.